The December wind carried more than just the scent of pine and wood smoke as Catherine adjusted her emerald green coat for the third time in 10 minutes. Standing before the mirror in their private chambers at Adelaide Cottage, she caught William's reflection watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. There was something different about him this morning, something that made her stomach flutter with an unease she hadn't felt since their early courtship days. "You look beautiful," William said softly, but his voice carried an undertone that made Catherine turn to face him fully. His hands were clasped behind his back in that familiar stance he adopted when he was wrestling with difficult thoughts, the same posture she'd seen him take before difficult conversations with his father or during those long nights when the weight of his future responsibilities seemed to press down on his shoulders like a physical force. Catherine smoothed her hands over her coat, a gesture that had become automatic whenever she felt uncertain. The emerald green had been chosen deliberately, it was William's favorite color on her, and today felt like a day when every detail mattered, though she couldn't explain why. The Christmas walk to St. Mary Magdalene Church was a tradition as old as the monarchy itself, but this year felt charged with an energy that made her skin prickle with anticipation and anxiety in equal measure. "The children are excited," she said, filling the silence that had stretched between them. It was true, George had been bouncing around the cottage since dawn, practicing his formal bow while Charlotte had spent 20 minutes deciding between her burgundy coat and her navy one. Louis, at his tender age, was simply thrilled at the prospect of seeing his great-grandmother, though he had no real understanding of the significance of the day ahead. William nodded, but Catherine noticed how his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd learned to read these micro-expressions over their years together, the way his left eyebrow would twitch when he was frustrated, how his breathing would become slightly more shallow when he was nervous, the way his fingers would drum against his leg when he was excited. Today, his entire body seemed coiled with tension, like a spring wound too tightly. "Catherine," he began, then stopped himself. She watched as he ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that would have horrified his private secretary but one that she found endearing in its humanity. "There are things we need to discuss. After today. Important things." The words hung in the air between them like morning frost, beautiful but somehow ominous. Catherine felt her heart rate quicken, though she wasn't sure if it was from excitement or dread. In their years of marriage, William had never been one for dramatic pronouncements. He was steady, reliable, sometimes maddeningly practical. When he spoke of important things with that particular gravity in his voice, it usually meant their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't control. "What kind of things?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know. There was a comfort in not knowing, in being able to focus on the simple pleasure of a family Christmas walk without the weight of whatever knowledge was pressing against William's consciousness like water against a dam. William crossed the room to her, his movements careful and deliberate. When he reached for her hands, Catherine noticed his were slightly cold, despite the warmth of the cottage. His fingers interlaced with hers in a gesture that was both intimate and somehow formal, as if he was trying to anchor himself to this moment before it slipped away. "The Queen spoke with me yesterday evening," he said quietly. "About the future. About timing. About what the next year will bring." Catherine felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that whatever was coming would mark a before and after in their lives. She'd felt this sensation only a few times before, when William had proposed, when they'd walked down the aisle at Westminster Abbey, when each of their children had been born. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the only way forward was to jump, trusting that there would be solid ground on the other side. "And," she prompted gently, though she could see in his eyes that he wasn't ready to give her the full picture. "Not yet. Not here," with the children's laughter echoing from downstairs and the weight of tradition and expectation pressing down on them from all sides. William lifted their joined hands to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her throat tighten with emotion. "After today," he repeated. "Let's just focus on today first." The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted them, followed by Charlotte's voice calling for her mother. Catherine squeezed William's hands once more before releasing them, filing away this moment to examine later when she had the luxury of time and privacy. She could feel that they were standing on the threshold of something significant, but, for now, she needed to be present for her children, for the tradition, for the carefully orchestrated public appearance that would be dissected and analyzed by millions of people around the world. As they made their way downstairs, Catherine caught glimpses of the preparations happening around them. Staff members moved with quiet efficiency, checking and double-checking details that had been planned for months. The route to the church had been secured, the guest list finalized, the media positions established. Everything was choreographed down to the minute, yet Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that beneath all this careful planning, something spontaneous and uncontrollable was about to unfold. George stood at attention near the front door, his small body radiating the seriousness with which he approached these public duties. At 10 years old, he was beginning to understand his role in ways that both impressed and saddened Catherine. She watched as William knelt down to adjust their son's tie, murmuring something that made George's serious expression soften into a genuine smile. Charlotte was spinning in circles, watching her burgundy coat flare out around her legs, while Louis clung to his nanny's hand with the wide-eyed wonder of a child who sensed excitement without understanding its source. Looking at her children, Catherine felt the familiar tug of maternal protection, the desire to shield them from the complexities and pressures that came with their unique position in the world. "Ready?" William asked, but the question seemed directed more to Catherine than to the group as a whole. She met his gaze and saw layers of meaning in that single word, ready for the walk, ready for the public scrutiny, ready for whatever conversation awaited them afterward. "Ready," she replied, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. The December air hit them as soon as they stepped outside, crisp and clean with the promise of snow that the weather forecasters had been predicting all week. Catherine pulled her coat tighter around herself and felt William's hand find the small of her back, a gesture of support that had become second nature to him over the years. The path to St. Mary Magdalene Church was one they had walked many times before, but today each step felt weighted with significance. Catherine found herself noticing details she had previously overlooked, the way the frost clung to the bare branches of the oak trees, the sound of their footsteps on the gravel path, the warm golden light spilling from the windows of the cottages they passed. Local residents had gathered along the route, many holding small Union Jack flags or bouquets of winter flowers. Catherine smiled and waved, falling into the rhythm of public engagement that had become as natural as breathing. She watched William do the same, noting how he seemed to draw energy from these interactions even as she sensed the undercurrent of tension that continued to run through him like an underground stream. "Merry Christmas," a young girl called out, and Catherine paused to accept a small posy of holly and ivy. The child's mother beamed with pride as cameras clicked around them, capturing what would become one of the defining images of this Christmas walk. But, even as Catherine smiled and thanked the little girl, part of her mind remained focused on the weight of William's earlier words and the promise of revelations to come. As they continued toward the church, Catherine became increasingly aware of the media attention focused on them. The photographers and cameramen maintained their respectful distance, but she could feel their lenses trained on every gesture, every expression, every interaction. Tomorrow, these images would be analyzed for clues about the state of their marriage, the health of the monarchy, the future of the royal family. The irony wasn't lost on her that while the public searched for hidden meanings in their every move, she was the one walking blindly toward a conversation that might change everything. The church bells began to chime as they approached St. Mary Magdalene, their bronze voices carrying across the countryside with an authority that spoke of centuries of tradition. Catherine felt a familiar sense of reverence wash over her as the beautiful flint and stone building came into view, its Norman architecture a testament to the enduring nature of faith and tradition in an ever-changing world. Queen Elizabeth stood at the church entrance, resplendent in royal blue with her signature pearl necklace catching the morning light. Despite her advancing years, her posture remained perfectly erect, her smile gracious but controlled. Catherine felt the familiar flutter of nerves she always experienced in the Queen's presence, despite years of family gatherings and private conversations. There was something about the monarch's steady gaze that seemed to see everything, to understand nuances that others might miss. As they approached for the traditional greeting, Catherine noticed something pass between William and his grandmother, a look that lasted only seconds but seemed heavy with unspoken communication. The Queen's hand lingered on William's arm a moment longer than protocol required, and Catherine caught a fleeting expression of what might have been concern, or perhaps anticipation, cross the elderly woman's features. "Catherine, dear," the Queen said warmly, but even her greeting seemed to carry an undercurrent of significance that made Catherine's pulse quicken. The service itself passed in a blur of familiar hymns and readings, but Catherine found it difficult to focus on the words. Her attention kept drifting to William beside her, noting the way his jaw remained tight throughout the sermon, the way his hands rested formally on his knees rather than seeking hers as they usually did during these public appearances. When they stood for the final hymn, "O come, all ye faithful," Catherine felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of emotion wash over her. The combined voices of the congregation, the soaring notes of the organ, the weight of tradition and continuity represented by this simple Christmas service, it all seemed to crystallize into a moment of profound recognition that change was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. As they filed out of the church after the service, accepting Christmas wishes from fellow congregants and posing for the obligatory photographs, Catherine found herself storing away mental snapshots of the day. The way the winter light fell across William's face as he spoke with the vicar. The sound of Charlotte's delighted laughter as she played with a friend's dog. The weight of tradition and expectation that seemed to hang in the air like incense. But, underlying all of these observations was the growing certainty that this Christmas walk was indeed signaling something significant, something that would become clear only when she and William finally had their promised conversation, away from the cameras and crowds, away from the weight of public expectation and royal protocol. As they made their way back toward Adelaide Cottage, Catherine felt William's hand brush against hers, a brief contact that sent a jolt of electricity up her arm. She glanced at him and caught him watching her with an expression of such tenderness and determination that her breath caught in her throat. Whatever was coming, she realized, it wasn't something to fear. The love in William's eyes, the careful way he had been handling this entire day, the gravity with which he had spoken about their future, these weren't the actions of a man preparing to deliver devastating news. These were the actions of someone preparing to share something precious, something that required the right moment and the right setting to be properly understood. The realization brought with it a flutter of excitement that she tried to suppress, not wanting to build expectations that might prove false. But, as they walked the familiar path back to their cottage, their children's voices mixing with the December wind, Catherine allowed herself to hope that whatever William needed to tell her would bring them closer together rather than drive them apart. The day was drawing toward its close, and, with it, the promise of answers to questions she hadn't even known she should be asking. The afternoon light was beginning to fade when Catherine finally found herself alone with William in their private sitting room. The children had been whisked away by their nanny for afternoon tea and quiet time, leaving the cottage feeling strangely empty after the morning's excitement. The silence that stretched between them was different from the comfortable quiet they usually shared. This was charged with anticipation, heavy with unspoken words. William stood by the window, his back to Catherine as he gazed out at the grounds of the estate. The formal clothes he had worn for the church service had been replaced by casual trousers and a soft gray sweater that she had given him for his birthday, yet even in these relaxed clothes, his posture remained rigid with tension. Catherine settled into the armchair she favored, tucking her legs beneath her in a gesture that would have horrified her etiquette instructor but felt necessary for the emotional comfort it provided. "The walk went well," she said finally, needing to break the silence that was becoming oppressive. The Queen seemed pleased. William turned from the window, and Catherine was struck by the complexity of emotions playing across his features. There was love there, certainly, but also something that looked like anticipation mixed with apprehension. His blue eyes, usually so steady and reassuring, seemed to be searching her face for something she couldn't identify. "She was more than pleased," William said quietly, moving to sit on the sofa across from her. The distance he chose felt deliberate, as if he needed space to find the right words for whatever he was about to say. "Catherine, what I need to tell you, it's going to change everything. For us, for the children, for how we live our lives." Catherine felt her heart rate increase, but she forced herself to remain calm. Years of royal training had taught her to maintain composure even when her internal world was in chaos. "Then, tell me," she said simply. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." William leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles showed white. "My father has made a decision about the timeline for his own succession plans," he began, his voice careful and measured. "The transition that we always knew would come eventually, it's going to happen much sooner than anyone expected." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Catherine felt the world shift slightly on its axis as the implications of what William was saying began to sink in. She had always known this day would come, had been prepared for it in theory, but hearing it spoken aloud made it suddenly, terrifyingly real. "How soon?" she asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "The Queen will make the official announcement after the new year," William said. "The coronation is being planned for late spring. By summer, Catherine, we'll be..." He paused, as if saying the words aloud would make them more real than he was ready for. "We'll be the Prince and Princess of Wales." Catherine felt the breath leave her lungs in a rush. She had known this moment would arrive eventually, but she had always imagined it as something far in the future, something they would have decades to prepare for. The idea that it was mere months away felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. The children, she said automatically, her maternal instincts kicking in before any other consideration. George especially. He's still so young. I know. William's voice was thick with emotion. That's what makes this so difficult. We've tried so hard to give them a normal childhood, to protect them from the weight of what their futures hold. But George will need to begin preparing for his role as second in line to the throne. There will be additional security, more formal education, fewer opportunities for the kind of spontaneous family moments we've treasured. Catherine rose from her chair and moved to the window William had abandoned, needing to process this information while looking at something beyond the walls of the cottage. The ground stretched out before her, peaceful and familiar, but even they seemed different now that she was viewing them through the lens of their changed circumstances. Everything looked the same, yet nothing would ever be quite the same again. How do you feel about it? She asked, not turning around. She could sense William's movement behind her, could feel him approaching even though he made no sound. Terrified, he admitted, and the honesty in his voice made her turn to face him. Honored. Overwhelmed. Ready, in some ways. Completely unprepared in others. His hands found her waist, pulling her gently against him. But, mostly, I feel grateful that I don't have to face it alone. Catherine melted into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her cheek. The familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him, soap and sunshine and that indefinable quality that had drawn her to him from their first meeting at university. In his arms, the magnitude of what lay ahead seemed more manageable, though no less significant. What about your father? She asked. Is he well? William's arms tightened around her almost imperceptibly. He's fine, he said carefully. This isn't about health concerns. It's about timing, about preparing the monarchy for the challenges of the modern world. He feels that a younger generation in the primary roles will help ensure the continuity and relevance of the institution. Catherine heard what William wasn't saying as clearly as what he was. This was about strategic planning, about the careful orchestration of power that had kept the British monarchy stable for over 1,000 years. It was about recognizing that the world was changing rapidly, and that the royal family needed to change with it to remain relevant and respected. The Queen knows? Catherine asked, though she suspected the answer from the meaningful looks she had observed that morning. She's the one who suggested the timeline, William confirmed. She's been planning this transition for months, working with my father to ensure everything happens smoothly. The Christmas walk today, she wanted to see us in action one more time as the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. She wanted to observe how we handled the public attention, how we worked together as a team. Catherine pulled back to look at William's face, understanding beginning to dawn. We were being evaluated. We were being celebrated, William corrected gently. The Queen has complete confidence in our ability to take on these new roles. Today was about her own process of letting go, of passing the torch to the next generation. The weight of that responsibility settled around Catherine's shoulders like a mantle, heavy but not unwelcome. She thought about the Queen's long reign, the dignity and grace with which she had carried out her duties for over 7 decades. The idea of stepping into even a portion of that legacy felt both humbling and inspiring. There's more, William said, and Catherine braced herself for whatever additional revelations were coming. With the new roles come new residences. We'll be moving to a larger estate, something more suited to our increased security needs and official responsibilities. The children will need to change schools, we'll need larger staff, and our public schedule will increase significantly. Catherine nodded, having expected as much. The practical implications of their elevated status were almost as daunting as the emotional ones. When? She asked. The move will happen gradually, starting in the spring. We'll have time to help the children adjust, to find the right schools, to make sure the transition is as smooth as possible for everyone involved. Catherine moved to the sofa and sank down onto it, suddenly, feeling the full weight of the day's events. The morning's Christmas walk, which had seemed like just another public engagement, now revealed itself as something much more significant, a final performance in their current roles, a public goodbye to the life they had known. "How are you feeling about all of this?" William asked, settling beside her and taking her hand in both of his. His thumbs traced gentle circles across her knuckles, a gesture that was both comforting and seeking comfort. Catherine considered the question carefully. How did she feel? Overwhelmed, certainly. Excited, surprisingly. Nervous about the increased scrutiny that would come with their elevated status. Worried about the impact on their children's lives. But, underneath all of these immediate reactions was something deeper, a sense of purpose, of stepping into a role she had been unconsciously preparing for since the moment she had fallen in love with William. "I feel ready," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Not completely prepared. I don't think anyone ever could be completely prepared for something like this. But, ready to learn, ready to serve, ready to support you in whatever comes next." William lifted their joined hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture so intimate and tender that it brought tears to her eyes. "I love you," he said simply. "For saying that, for meaning it, for being exactly the partner I need for this journey." "We're in this together," Catherine replied, echoing the words she had spoken on their wedding day. They had seemed almost ceremonial then, part of the pomp and circumstance of a royal wedding. Now they felt like a sacred vow, a promise renewed in the face of challenges they were only beginning to understand. "There will be training," William continued, his voice becoming more businesslike as he shifted into planning mode. "Protocol sessions, briefings on constitutional law, meetings with government officials. Your schedule will become much more structured, and there will be less flexibility for spontaneous family time." Catherine squeezed his hand. "We'll make it work," she said. "We'll find ways to maintain our family life within whatever structure we're given. The children need stability, but they also need to understand the importance of the work we'll be doing." William nodded, but she could see the concern in his eyes. He had grown up in this world, had experienced firsthand the pressures and limitations it could impose on family life. His desire to protect their children from those same pressures was in constant tension with his understanding that preparing them for their own future roles was equally important. "George will need additional tutoring," William said quietly. "Constitutional history, public speaking, protocol. He'll hate it at first. Then, we'll make it interesting," Catherine replied firmly. "We'll find ways to make his education engaging and meaningful. He's intelligent and curious. If we can help him understand why these things matter, he'll embrace the learning." William's expression softened with admiration and gratitude. "This is why I knew we could handle this," he said. "Your ability to see solutions instead of problems, to find ways to make even the most challenging situations workable for our family." Catherine felt a flush of pride at his words, but also a flutter of anxiety. "I'm going to need help," she admitted. "More staff, certainly, but also guidance from people who understand this world better than I do. Your grandmother, maybe some of the private secretaries who have been through transitions like this before." "Already arranged," William said with a small smile. "The Queen has personally selected a team of advisors to help with your transition. They'll be discreet, patient, and completely dedicated to ensuring you feel confident in your new role." The sun was setting outside their window, casting long shadows across the sitting room. Catherine realized they had been talking for hours, yet it felt like only minutes had passed. The information William had shared was still settling into her consciousness, reshaping her understanding of their immediate future and their long-term plans. "The public announcement," she said suddenly. "How will that work?" "Carefully orchestrated," William replied. "The Queen will make the initial announcement about the succession timeline. Then, there will be a series of briefings for the press, emphasizing the continuity and stability of the transition. Our first public appearances in our new roles will be planned to demonstrate our readiness and commitment." Catherine thought about the media attention that would follow such an announcement, the scrutiny that would be focused on every aspect of their lives and their children's lives. It was daunting, but not entirely unfamiliar. They had been living under public attention for years. This would simply be an intensification of something they had already learned to manage. And, privately, she asked, "How do we tell the children?" William was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine could see him working through the complexities of explaining such a significant change to their young family. "Together," he said finally. We sit them down and explain that Daddy's job is changing, that it's an honor and a responsibility, and that while some things about our lives will be different, the most important things, our love for them, our commitment to being the best parents we can be, will never change. Catherine nodded, already mentally planning how to make such a conversation age-appropriate for each of their children. George would understand more than Charlotte, and Charlotte would understand more than Louis, but they would all need reassurance that this change, while significant, wasn't something to fear. When? She asked. Tomorrow, William said. Before the holidays get into full swing and before any rumors start circulating. They deserve to hear it from us first, in our own words, in the safety of their own home. The weight of that upcoming conversation settled over Catherine like a physical presence. By tomorrow evening, their entire family would be consciously preparing for a future that was arriving much sooner than any of them had expected. As if sensing her thoughts, William moved closer to her on the sofa, pulling her against his side in a gesture that was both protective and seeking protection. "We'll get through this," he said quietly. "All of it. Together." Catherine settled into his embrace, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her ear. Outside their window, the winter evening was closing in, but inside their sitting room, she felt the warm glow of certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a united team, just as they had faced every other challenge in their marriage. The Christmas walk that morning had indeed signaled something significant, not just a change in their titles or responsibilities, but a deepening of their partnership, a strengthening of their commitment to each other and to the roles they had been born and chosen to fulfill. The following morning dawned gray and misty, with the kind of English winter weather that seemed to mirror Catherine's internal state, not quite stormy, but certainly unsettled. She had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with crown jewels and state dinners, with flashing cameras and endless red carpets. More than once she had woken with her heart racing, only to find William sleeping peacefully beside her, his presence a steadying anchor in the midst of her swirling thoughts. Now, as she prepared breakfast for the children in the familiar comfort of their cottage kitchen, Catherine tried to maintain the appearance of normalcy while her mind raced with thoughts of how to approach the conversation that lay ahead. George was already at the table, methodically working his way through a bowl of porridge while reading a book about dinosaurs. Charlotte was practicing ballet positions by the window, her small form graceful and unconscious of the momentous day ahead. Louis sat in his high chair, cheerfully smearing jam across his toast and his face with equal enthusiasm. "Mummy, can we build a snowman today?" Charlotte asked, pausing mid-pirouette to look hopefully at Catherine. The weatherman on the telly said it might snow. Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion at the innocent request. By this time tomorrow, such spontaneous family activities would need to be planned weeks in advance, cleared through security, and potentially accompanied by photographers documenting their normal family moments for public consumption. The simplicity of a child's request to build a snowman suddenly felt precious beyond measure. "We'll see what the weather brings," Catherine replied carefully, not wanting to make promises she might not be able to keep. "But first, Daddy and I need to have a family talk with all of you after breakfast." George looked up from his book, his young face already showing the perceptiveness that sometimes surprised Catherine with its maturity. "Is everything all right?" he asked, and she could hear the slight note of worry in his voice that made her heart ache. "Everything is perfectly fine," Catherine assured him, moving to ruffle his hair affectionately. "Daddy has some exciting news to share with all of us about his work, that's all." William appeared in the kitchen doorway as if summoned by the mention of his name, still in his dressing gown but with his hair freshly combed and his expression carefully composed. Catherine could see the tension around his eyes, the slight tightness in his jaw that betrayed his own nervousness about the upcoming conversation. "Good morning, my loves," he said, his voice warm and natural despite the circumstances. He kissed each of the children on the top of their heads before moving to Catherine and wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, a gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by their observant eldest son. "Daddy, Mummy says you have exciting news," Charlotte announced, abandoning her ballet practice to climb onto William's lap once he had settled at the table. "Are we getting a puppy?" The question was so innocent and hopeful that both Catherine and William couldn't help but smile, despite the weight of what they were actually preparing to discuss. "Not exactly," William said gently, settling Charlotte more comfortably against him. "But it is about our family, and about some changes that are coming." Louis chose that moment to fling his toast across the room with a delighted giggle, providing a moment of blessed normalcy as Catherine moved to clean up the mess while William continued his careful introduction to the topic at hand. "You know how Daddy has a job working for great-grandmama the Queen," William began, his voice gentle but serious enough to capture even Charlotte's often scattered attention. "Well, that job is going to be changing soon. It's going to become a bigger job, which is a wonderful honor, but it also means some things about our lives will be different." George set down his spoon with deliberate precision, his young mind already working through the implications of his father's careful words. "Different how?" he asked, and Catherine could hear echoes of William's own directness in their son's question. William exchanged a quick glance with Catherine, seeking reassurance before plunging ahead. "I'm going to become the Prince of Wales," he said simply. "Which means Mummy will become the Princess of Wales, and you children will have new titles as well." The silence that followed was broken only by Louis's contented babbling as he worked on demolishing his second piece of toast. Charlotte looked confused, her young mind struggling to process what this change might mean for her daily life. George, however, had gone very still, his blue eyes, so like his father's, wide with understanding that went beyond his years. "Like Uncle Harry used to be?" Charlotte asked finally, her reference point being the only Prince of Wales she could clearly remember from her early childhood. "No, sweetheart," Catherine said gently, moving to sit beside her daughter. "Uncle Harry was never the Prince of Wales. Grandpa Charles is the Prince of Wales now, but he's going to become king, which means Daddy will take over his old job." "When?" George asked quietly, and Catherine could see him working through the implications with a seriousness that both impressed and worried her. "Soon," William replied honestly. "Within the next year. There will be a big ceremony, like a very special church service, and then everything will be official." Charlotte's face brightened with sudden excitement. "Will there be a party? With cake and fancy dresses?" Despite the gravity of the moment, Catherine found herself laughing at her daughter's priorities. "There will be lots of fancy dresses," she assured Charlotte. "And probably cake too." But George remained quiet, his young mind clearly processing the larger implications of this change. Finally, he looked up at his father with an expression that was heartbreakingly mature. "Does this mean I'll be second in line to the throne?" The words hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched her 10-year-old son confront the weight of his destiny with a composure that spoke to both his natural character and the careful preparation they had already given him. "Yes," William said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "But not for a very long time, and you don't need to worry about that now. Your job right now is to be a 10-year-old boy who loves dinosaurs and football and building Lego castles with his sister." George nodded slowly, but Catherine could see the wheels turning in his mind. "Will we have to move?" he asked, demonstrating an understanding of royal protocol that was both impressive and concerning. Eventually, William admitted. "We'll need a bigger house that's better suited to our new responsibilities. But not immediately, and when we do move, we'll make sure you have time to adjust and that your new schools are places where you'll be happy." "New schools?" Charlotte's excitement about parties and cake evaporated instantly. "But I like my school. And what about my friends?" Catherine's heart broke a little at the genuine distress in her daughter's voice. "We'll make sure you stay in touch with your friends," she promised. "And we'll find you a wonderful new school where you'll make even more friends." "But why do we have to change everything?" Charlotte asked, and Catherine could hear the beginnings of tears in her voice. William lifted Charlotte from his lap and knelt down so he was at her eye level, taking her small hands in his larger ones. "Sometimes, sweetheart, we have to make changes because we have important work to do. Daddy's new job will be helping to take care of lots of people across the whole country, and sometimes helping people requires us to make sacrifices." "What kind of helping?" George asked, his natural curiosity overcoming his apprehension. William's expression softened with pride at his son's question. "All kinds of helping," he replied. "Meeting with leaders from other countries to work on important problems. Supporting charities that help people who are struggling. Visiting schools and hospitals and community centers to show people that we care about them. Being a symbol of unity and stability for the country." Catherine watched as understanding began to dawn on both children's faces. They had accompanied their parents on various official engagements over the years, had seen firsthand the way people reacted to royal visits, had witnessed the comfort and joy that such occasions could bring to communities. Like when we went to the children's hospital and everyone was so happy to see us? Charlotte asked, remembering a particularly successful recent engagement. Exactly like that, Catherine confirmed. But there will be more of those visits, and they'll be even more important because of Daddy's new role. Louis, blissfully unaware of the serious conversation happening around him, chose that moment to clap his hands together and shout "Dada" with delighted enthusiasm, breaking the tension and making everyone laugh. What about Louis? George asked, gesturing toward his baby brother. Will all this change for him too? William scooped Louis out of his high chair and settled him on his knee, where the toddler immediately began playing with the buttons on his father's shirt. Louis is young enough that this will all feel normal to him, William explained. He won't remember a time when things were different. Catherine could see George processing this information, understanding that his little brother would grow up with advantages and challenges that George himself was only just beginning to comprehend. The weight of being the eldest, of serving as an example and protector for his younger siblings, was already settling on George's young shoulders. Will there be more security? George asked, demonstrating once again his mature understanding of their circumstances. Yes, William admitted. More security people, more planning required for things like going to the cinema or out to eat. But the security team will be people who care about keeping our family safe, and we'll work with them to make sure you can still have normal experiences whenever possible. Catherine reached over to squeeze George's hand. We know this is a lot to think about, she said gently. And we want you to know that you can ask us anything, anytime. There are no questions too big or too small, and there's nothing you need to be worried about discussing with us. Charlotte, who had been unusually quiet for several minutes, suddenly perked up with a new question. Will I get to wear a tiara? The question was so perfectly Charlotte that both Catherine and William burst into laughter, the tension of the moment breaking like a soap bubble. There might be occasions where you'll wear very fancy jewelry, Catherine admitted. But probably not until you're much older. And George gets to be a prince? Charlotte continued, her young mind fixated on the more glamorous aspects of their changing circumstances. He already is a prince, William reminded her. You're already a princess. Those parts don't change, just the specific titles that go with our family's position. George, meanwhile, had gone quiet again, and Catherine could see him struggling with thoughts too complex for easy expression. She moved to sit beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders in a gesture of maternal comfort and solidarity. What are you thinking about? She asked gently. George leaned into her embrace, his young body seeking the comfort even as his mind grappled with adult concepts. I'm thinking about how everything is going to be different, he said quietly. And I'm worried about whether I'll be good at it. Catherine felt tears threaten again at her son's vulnerability and wisdom. You know what, she said, tilting his chin up so she could look directly into his eyes. Daddy felt exactly the same way when he was your age and first started understanding what his future would hold. And do you know what Grandpa Charles told him? George shook his head, his attention completely focused on his mother's words. He said that being good at this job isn't about being perfect or never making mistakes. It's about caring about people, working hard to help them, and always trying to do the right thing even when it's difficult. And you already know how to do all of those things. William nodded in agreement, his own emotional response to his son's concerns evident in his expression. The most important thing to remember, he added, is that this is something we'll learn together, as a family. Nobody expects you to have all the answers right now. Nobody expects any of us to have all the answers. Charlotte, who had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention she usually reserved for stories about princesses and fairy tales, suddenly announced, I think it sounds exciting. Like being in a real-life princess story. Her innocent enthusiasm was exactly what the family needed to lift the heavy mood that had settled over their breakfast table. Catherine found herself smiling despite her own concerns, reminded once again that children often possessed a wisdom and resilience that adults tended to underestimate. It will be exciting, she agreed. There will be challenges, and there will be times when we have to work very hard, but there will also be incredible experiences and the chance to do really meaningful work helping people. As if sensing that the serious part of the conversation was coming to an end, Louis began to fuss in William's arms, clearly ready to be released from the confines of breakfast table conversation. William stood to carry him to his toy basket, but not before exchanging a meaningful look with Catherine that conveyed both relief and continued apprehension about the path ahead. The conversation had gone better than either of them had dared hope. The children's questions had been thoughtful and age-appropriate, their concerns manageable and their excitement genuine. But Catherine knew that this was just the beginning of a much longer process of adjustment and preparation that would unfold over the coming months. As she began clearing the breakfast dishes, Catherine found herself thinking about the Christmas walk just 2 days ago. What had seemed like a simple family tradition now revealed itself as the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Every step they had taken toward the church, every smile they had shared with the gathered crowds, every moment of that carefully orchestrated public appearance had been preparing them, and the watching world, for the announcement that would soon reshape their lives completely. The morning light streaming through their kitchen windows was growing stronger, promising a day that might indeed bring the snow Charlotte had hoped for. But, regardless of the weather, Catherine knew that this day would be remembered as the one when their family consciously stepped forward into a future that would challenge and change them in ways they were only beginning to understand. 3 months later, Catherine stood in the grand entrance hall of their new residence, watching as teams of removal specialists carefully transported the last of their belongings from Adelaide Cottage. The spring morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny celebrations of change. Everything looked different in this new space, grander, more formal, but somehow not quite home yet. The transformation of their lives had happened with breathtaking speed once the Queen's announcement was made public. The media frenzy that followed had been intense but manageable, thanks to careful preparation by their communications team and the genuine public enthusiasm for the news. Catherine had been surprised by the overwhelming positive response, the sense that the country was genuinely excited about this changing of the guard. "Mummy, where should my dinosaur collection go?" George called from the main staircase, his arms full of carefully wrapped prehistoric creatures. At almost 11 now, he had grown noticeably in the past few months, not just physically but in his understanding of his changing role. The initial anxiety about their new circumstances had given way to a mature acceptance that sometimes made Catherine's heart ache with pride and concern in equal measure. "In your new study," Catherine replied, referring to the room that had been specially designed as a combination bedroom and private workspace for their eldest son. It was larger than his old room, with space for both play and the additional tutoring that had become part of his daily routine. "Remember, it's the blue room at the end of the hallway." Charlotte appeared at the top of the stairs, spinning in circles to make her pink dress flare out around her. "I love my new room," she announced to no one in particular. "It has a window seat where I can read, and Mummy said I can pick out new curtains." The children's adaptation to their new life had been remarkably smooth, aided by careful planning and the resilient optimism that seemed to be their natural inheritance. Their new schools had welcomed them warmly, the increased security had been implemented so gradually as to seem natural, and the busier schedule of official engagements had been balanced with deliberate efforts to maintain family time. William emerged from what would become his new private office, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair slightly mussed from the morning's work of directing the placement of furniture and artwork. He caught Catherine's eye and smiled, an expression that conveyed both exhaustion and satisfaction with their progress. "The last of the boxes from your old office," he announced, gesturing to a collection of containers that held the personal items Catherine had accumulated during her years of charitable work. "Where would you like them?" Catherine looked at the boxes that contained the artifacts of her previous role, thank you letters from children she had visited in hospitals, photographs from community events, small gifts from organizations she had supported. They represented a version of herself that was evolving but not disappearing, adapting to new responsibilities while maintaining the core mission of service that had always driven her work. "The morning room, I think," she decided. "I'll go through them properly once we're settled and decide what should be displayed and what should be archived." The morning room had been designated as Catherine's informal office space, a place where she could review correspondence, plan engagements, and meet with her private secretary in a setting that felt more personal than the formal offices that would be used for state business. It was painted in soft yellows and greens, colors she had chosen because they reminded her of the spring gardens at Adelaide Cottage. As William carried the boxes away, Catherine found herself alone in the entrance hall for a moment, surrounded by the controlled chaos of moving day but also by the profound sense of change that had been building since that December morning when everything shifted. She thought about the Christmas walk, how innocent it had seemed at the time, how little she had understood about what it was truly signaling. The sound of car wheels on gravel announced the arrival of more visitors. Today was not just moving day, but also the day of their first official engagement as the new Prince and Princess of Wales. In 3 hours, they would be visiting a children's hospital in London, their first public appearance since the formal investiture ceremony that had made their new roles official. Catherine touched the delicate gold and sapphire necklace at her throat, a gift from the Queen that had once belonged to Princess Diana. Wearing it felt like carrying a piece of history, a connection to the woman who had held this title before her and who had understood both its privileges and its burdens. The weight of the jewelry was slight, but the weight of what it represented was immense. "The advanced security team is here," William announced, returning from his office run looking more composed and princely. He had changed into a dark suit and tie, and Catherine was struck once again by how naturally he carried the authority of his position. "They'll want to do a final briefing before we leave." Catherine nodded, smoothing down the royal blue dress she had chosen for the hospital visit. The color had been selected deliberately, it photographed well, conveyed both professionalism and warmth, and matched the official colors of the hospital they would be visiting. Every detail of their public appearances was now considered through multiple lenses: protocol, public perception, media impact, and symbolic meaning. The children appeared in the entrance hall as the security team arrived, drawn by the activity and excitement of so many people coming and going. Louis toddled over to Catherine and raised his arms to be picked up, his small face serious with the concentration that accompanied his efforts to walk in new and interesting environments. "Are you going to help sick children today?" Charlotte asked, having absorbed enough about their parents' work to understand the basic purpose of hospital visits. "We're going to visit with some children who are in the hospital, and with the doctors and nurses who are taking care of them," Catherine explained, settling Louis on her hip while she spoke. "We want them to know that people care about them and appreciate the hard work they're doing." George, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward with an expression of thoughtful concern. "Could we bring them something? Like books or games?" Catherine felt a surge of pride at her son's instinctive understanding of service. "That's a lovely thought," she said. "The hospital has special rules about what visitors can bring, but there are other ways we can help. Sometimes just showing up and spending time with people is the most important thing we can do." William appeared beside them, having finished his conversation with the security team. "Ready?" he asked Catherine, and she could hear the familiar note of anticipation in his voice that always preceded their joint engagements. Despite the formality of their new roles, he still approached their work with genuine enthusiasm for the connections they would make and the good they might accomplish. "Ready," Catherine confirmed, passing Louis to his nanny and smoothing her dress one final time. She picked up the small bouquet of flowers that would be presented to the children's ward, a tradition that added a personal touch to official visits. As they prepared to leave their new home for their first engagement as the Prince and Princess of Wales, Catherine caught William's hand and squeezed it gently. He returned the pressure, a silent communication that had become second nature to them over the years of their partnership. The drive to London was familiar despite their changed circumstances. They had made this journey countless times before, but today it felt different, weighted with new significance and new responsibilities. Catherine watched the countryside roll past the car windows and thought about all the people they would meet today, all the lives they would touch in small but hopefully meaningful ways. "Nervous?" William asked, though he was studying her face with the careful attention that meant he already knew the answer. "Excited," Catherine replied, and realized it was completely true. Despite the magnitude of their new roles, despite the increased scrutiny and pressure, she felt energized by the prospect of the work ahead. The Christmas walk had marked the end of one chapter, but it had also marked the beginning of something she was genuinely eager to embrace. The hospital visit exceeded even their highest expectations. The children they met were brave and inspiring, the staff was dedicated and welcoming, and the media coverage captured exactly the tone of warmth and commitment they had hoped to convey. Catherine found herself relaxing into her new role, discovering that the essential work remained the same even if the context had changed. During their tour of the cardiac unit, they met a 7-year-old girl named Emma who was recovering from surgery. She presented Catherine with a hand-drawn picture of a princess in a blue dress, complete with a crown and a wide smile. "That's you," Emma announced proudly. "My mummy said you're a real princess, and I wanted to draw you a picture because you came to see me." Catherine knelt down to Emma's eye level, accepting the drawing with the same ceremony she would use for a state gift. "This is the most beautiful picture anyone has ever drawn of me," she said sincerely. "Would you like to know a secret about being a princess?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, her eyes wide with anticipation. "The most important part isn't the crown or the fancy dresses," Catherine whispered conspiratorially. "It's getting to meet brave, wonderful people like you." The exchange was captured by photographers and would later become one of the defining images of their first official engagement, but, in the moment, Catherine was focused entirely on the little girl whose courage and joy in the midst of difficult circumstances reminded her why this work mattered. As they drove home that evening, both Catherine and William were quiet, processing the success of their first day in their new roles. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that made the English countryside look like something from a fairy tale. "How do you feel?" William asked as they turned into the drive of their new home. Catherine considered the question carefully. How did she feel? Tired, certainly, but it was a good tiredness, the kind that came from meaningful work well done. "We're exactly where we belong." As they walked into their new home together, Catherine thought about the little girl's drawing tucked carefully into her handbag, about the Christmas walk that had started all of this, about the weight of history and the promise of the future. Everything had changed, and yet the most important things remained constant: their love for each other, their commitment to their children, their desire to serve something larger than themselves. The Christmas walk had signaled many things, but, perhaps most importantly, it had signaled the beginning of a new chapter in a story that was far from finished. As Catherine climbed the stairs to check on her children before dinner, she felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, she and William would face them together, just as they always had. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility and purpose, and Catherine had never felt more ready to embrace whatever came next.